She didn't know that the man she had come to trust had been in disguise the whole time. Now that the truth has been revealed, will she be able to forgive him, or will the lie destroy what they built together? The day was hot and stuffy, with the summer heat seeping into every corner of the city. Andrew Hoffman, owner of an empire of luxury restaurants and hotel chains, was far from his natural environment. In the center of town, specifically inside the Magnolia Bistro, he was disguised. It's completely different from how everyone knew him. Instead of his expensive suit and immaculate tie, he wore a simple waiter uniform with a wrinkled shirt and messy hair. He was there to figure out what was going wrong with his business. But the truth was, he was starting to question whether this life of power and control really made him happy. "What are you doing here, Andrew?" he mentally asked himself as he observed the surroundings. The restaurant's simple decor had a hidden charm, but it was far from the potential it should have had. He watched a young woman moving quickly between the tables. She was carrying plates, smiling at customers, and seemed to have an energy that he hadn't seen in many of his employees. But there in his disguise, he couldn't reveal who he really was. Her name was Harper Wells, and until that moment, Andrew didn't know much about her except that she worked there and, like everyone else, seemed driven by the exhausting and inhumane routine of the place. Harper was in her own daily struggle, trying to keep her head above water in an environment controlled by an authoritarian and abusive manager. But, unlike most, she didn't let herself be easily broken. In fact, she seemed to even feed off the challenge, using sarcasm and humor as a shield to protect her heart from the constant humiliation Andrew observed from afar. He noticed how she seemed different from the other employees who walked with their heads down in silence. She walked with confidence, even with the tension in the air. He, a man used to having everything under control, felt an inexplicable attraction to her defiant stance. But so far, there had been nothing more than occasional exchanges of glances. But that day, something would happen that would completely change the course of their lives. The storm and the fight for survival. The morning that had started calm and sunny was soon interrupted by a distant sound, a deep hum that seemed to come from below the earth. The ground trembled lightly. A strange sensation hung in the air. Andrew, who had been serving himself coffee in the staff area, looked around. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until a scream pierced the air. Earthquake. Chaos took over quickly. The restaurant, with its fragile walls and old structure, started shaking. The lights flickered. Harper, with the same calm with which she served her dishes, grabbed her tray firmly. But when she saw the other employees running in panic, she realized the situation was out of control. That's when Andrew, still disguised, felt the urge to act. He ran toward the kitchen, where Harper was still trying to calm customers, trying to get as many people out of the restaurant as possible. "Harper," he shouted, already at the kitchen door, "we need to get out now?" She looked at him, incredulous, but the urgency in his tone made her act. Together, they ran to the exit. But before they could fully escape, the entire building trembled again, this time with greater force. The roof partially collapsed, blocking the exit. Panic spread in every direction. Harper pulled Andrew into a small side corridor, where they took shelter. He looked at her, the fear in her eyes contrasting with the focus in his. "Are you okay?" he asked, holding her arm firmly as they balanced each other, while the ground continued shaking. "Yes, I think I am. But what now?" she replied, breathing heavily. Andrew, who had never imagined being in a situation like this, looked around. The truth was, he had no idea how they would get out of this. "Stay close to me, we'll find another way out." He took her hand, without thinking. It wasn't professional, but in that moment, it felt like the right thing to do. It was then that the ground trembled with such violence that the restaurant walls started to crack. And at that exact moment, the last part of the wall collapsed, creating a hole through which they could escape. Together, they ran toward the makeshift exit, not knowing where they were going. The city was in chaos, with tremors that seemed endless. But what they didn't know was that the worst was yet to come. As they ran away from the restaurant, a new wave of tremors made the ground open up in front of them. They were thrown down, falling into a narrow clearing deep in the forest. "Harper," Andrew shouted as he stood up, trying to figure out where they were. They were now in an entirely unfamiliar place, isolated in the middle of a forest, far from civilization. Rescue teams were somewhere, but until they found them, they would have to survive on their own. The relationship Andrew had with Harper, which had always been professional, was now about to be tested in a way he had never imagined. They were trapped. And with that came an unexpected opportunity for both of them to discover something more about each other, something that perhaps was stronger than survival itself. The forest floor was unstable beneath their feet. After the fall, Andrew and Harper struggled to get up, their bodies still stunned by the violent impact. The earthquake's echoes seemed to spread throughout the environment, but now they were in a different kind of chaos. They were alone, not knowing where to go or what to do. The city seemed miles away, and the rescues hadn't reached them yet. Andrew looked around, sweat running down his forehead, his heart still pounding. The feeling of being completely lost was overwhelming, but he knew they had to act. "Are you okay?" he asked, looking at Harper, who still seemed dizzy but steady. The worry in her eyes contrasted with the focus in his. "Yeah. ... I think so, but what now?" she replied, breathing heavily. Andrew had no immediate answer. They were in a dense forest, without maps or rescue teams in sight. Panic was starting to settle in his chest too, but he couldn't show it. He needed to stay calm. He couldn't let Harper see how desperate he really was. He moved ahead for a moment, trying to gather his thoughts. It wasn't just the circumstances of being lost that weighed on him, but what had happened between him and Harper, the bond that had formed suddenly, something he hadn't been prepared to face. She had helped him when he needed it most. And the touch of her hand, when they were running through the makeshift exit, had reminded him how she was more than just an employee. She was strong, fearless, and yet she seemed like a woman marked by something deeper than he had imagined. "We need to find a safer place to spend the night," he said, trying to keep his tone firm. "We can't stay here. We don't know when the rescues will come, but we need to be ready." Harper looked at him, her gaze fixed on his face, as if trying to understand his intentions. But she knew, just as well as he did, that they had to move forward. The night was coming, and without a direction, they would be lost even more deeply in the dark of the forest.
"Oh."
"And how are we supposed to do that?" she asked, her voice tinged with a hint of frustration. Andrew stepped forward, pointing to a hill in the distance that could be seen between the trees. "If we can get up there, we might get a better view of where we are. The ground should be firmer up there." Harper nodded, still skeptical. She knew things were complicated, and trusting someone who was just as lost as she was wasn't an easy choice. But at that moment, they had no other options. They had to move forward together. The path to the hill was harder than they expected. Every step felt heavier than the last, the fatigue beginning to accumulate in their bodies. The trees around them were so dense that the sun could barely be seen, and the only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind. As they walked, Andrew began to notice something curious. Even though Harper was visibly exhausted, she didn't complain or let it show. She kept a silent strength that he was beginning to admire. She wasn't just a strong woman. She was holding something within her that he didn't know how to recognize before. "You're in pain, aren't you?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the path. Harper looked at him for a moment, surprised, but then turned her gaze back to the ground, trying to hide what she was feeling. "I'm fine. Just a little ... tired." She smiled, but it wasn't a smile of someone who was okay. It was an attempt to mask the truth. She was hurt, and he knew it. He wanted to insist, but he held back. Didn't have time for that. They needed to get out of the forest first. Then, it might be time to talk about what was really going on. "Let's keep going," he said, looking ahead. As they climbed the hill, something strange happened. They stopped for a moment to rest, and that was when the words came out before Andrew could control them. "You know, you've been helping me more than anyone else here," he said, looking directly at her. He didn't know why he had said that, but now the words were out, and he was saying the things he hadn't had the courage to say before. Harper stopped for a moment, looking at him with wide eyes, as if trying to understand what he meant. But instead of answering right away, she turned and began walking again, her pace still steady. "Let's keep going. We can't stop now." She replied sharply, but her voice had a softness to it that he hadn't expected. Andrew stood there for a moment, absorbing what she had said, or rather, what she hadn't said. It was obvious that she was holding something back. And somehow, he felt that they were going beyond mere survival. They were going into something much more complicated. Something both of them were starting to recognize but couldn't fully understand yet. When they finally reached the top of the hill, the wind was stronger, and the view of the forest around them was breathtaking, but also terrifying. The vastness of what surrounded them made them feel even smaller and more vulnerable. Harper sat first, taking off her heavy boots and beginning to massage her feet. She was visibly tired, but her expression was calm, as if she had accepted their new reality. Andrew, on the other hand, looked at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set. "What do we do now?" asked Harper, still with her eyes fixed on the ground. Andrew sighed, sitting beside her. Silence settled between them for a moment. We wait and see what comes next," he replied, his voice softer than she expected. Time seemed to stretch there, but something inside of Harper began to shift. Maybe it was the way he looked at her. Maybe it was the way he now seemed reliable, even though he still carried the distance between them. But somehow, there, under the stars and with the silent forest around them, they began to realize that they had more in common than they had thought. Trust was growing between them, little by little. But what they didn't know was that, in truth, they were beginning to enter the most dangerous territory of all, the territory of the heart. As the hours dragged on, the forest around them seemed to close in even more. The darkness of the night was almost suffocating, and the eerie sounds of the woods only heightened the tension between them. Harper and Andrew sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Harper, still trying to mask her exhaustion, leaned back against the rough bark of the tree, her eyes scanning the sky above. The stars were barely visible, obscured by the thick canopy of leaves. It felt as though the night was swallowing them whole, the weight of the situation pressing in on every side. Andrew, on the other hand, was struggling to hide his growing anxiety. He wasn't used to being in a situation like this. He was a man of control, of power, and yet now he was just as helpless as Harper. This wasn't a business deal he could fix with money. This wasn't a problem he could solve with strategies or connections. It was survival, and that terrified him. The wind began to pick up, howling through the trees, a warning that something was coming. Harper shivered, not from the cold, but from the unease that was settling in her chest. She could feel it, the tension, the unspoken words, and the unfamiliar connection that had started to form between them. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about trust. And what they were starting to realize was that, in this strange new world, they would have to rely on each other. The first crack of thunder pierced the silence, and both of them tensed. The storm had arrived. "Need to find shelter," Andrew said quickly, standing up and brushing the dirt off his pants. The wind was beginning to pick up speed, and the first raindrops fell, quickly turning into a downpour. Harper nodded, already on her feet. She could see the urgency in Andrew's eyes, and for the first time, she didn't question his authority. They both knew that their best chance of surviving the storm was to work together. They sprinted through the forest, the rain now pouring down in sheets, drenching them both. The ground became slippery and uneven, making it harder to move. The wind howled through the trees, and the deafening sound of the storm masked everything else. The forest, once their protector, had turned into a wild and unforgiving place. "Over here?" Harper shouted, spotting what looked like a small cave further ahead. The trees had begun to bend under the weight of the storm, and it was becoming impossible to continue in the open. Andrew nodded, not saying a word, but his eyes showing the relief that washed over him. They ran towards the cave, slipping and stumbling in the mud, but finally reaching the safety of the rock walls just in time. They ducked into the small, sheltered space, gasping for air as they collapsed against the cold stone. For a moment, they both just sat there, listening to the storm rage outside. The sound of the rain pounding against the rocks, the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the cave, and the howling wind filled the silence between them. "Are you okay?" Andrew finally asked, his voice softer than it had been all day. He was looking at Harper, concern flickering in his eyes. She nodded, though she didn't speak at first. She was trying to shake off the cold, the fear, and the strange feeling of vulnerability that had crept up on her. Being trapped with Andrew in a cave during a storm was something she never imagined she'd experience. But somehow it felt right. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice was strained from the cold. They sat in silence for a while, the storm outside only growing stronger. The cave was small, but it provided them with a little warmth and protection from the elements. The space between them was charged, and both of them could feel it. They had been thrown into a situation that neither of them had prepared for, and yet they were here together. Harper Andrews said quietly, breaking the silence. I want to apologize. For being so distant. She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. The last time they'd had a real conversation, it had been tense and filled with unspoken words. But now, in the middle of a storm, trapped in the forest, it felt like they were finally getting somewhere. You don't have to apologize, she said, her voice softening. She had been angry, yes, but not anymore. Not with everything that had happened since then. We're just trying to survive, right? Andrew nodded, his expression serious. But there was something in his eyes that made Harper's heart skip a beat. She couldn't explain it, but there was a quiet intensity in his gaze that she hadn't noticed before. Maybe it was the storm. Or maybe it was the fear of being so alone in this strange place. But something about him felt different now. Something was shifting. It's not just about survival anymore, Andrew said, almost to himself. I think we both know that. Harper swallowed, trying to ignore the way her heart was suddenly pounding in her chest. She wasn't prepared for this. She wasn't prepared for any of it. We need to focus on getting out of here, she said, her voice more to herself than to Andrew. She didn't want to acknowledge the growing connection between them. Not yet. They still had too much to survive through. Andrew, for the first time, didn't argue. He simply nodded, his eyes still focused on her. It was as if he was finally seeing her for who she was, not just the strong, capable woman who could survive on her own, but the one who had made him feel something he couldn't explain. And as the storm continued to rage outside, neither of them said anything more. They just sat there, side by side, in the safety of the cave, knowing that the world outside would keep spinning, but they were now in this together. It was a beginning, a new chapter, and they both knew it would change everything. The hours dragged on, but the storm showed no signs of letting up. The cave, with its rocky and dark ceiling, was now warmer due to the heat from their close bodies. Rainwater dripped from the stones, but somehow the shelter seemed safe, and time seemed to have stopped. Harper, curled up with her knees drawn to her chest, watched the rainwater fall from the cave's ceiling. She could feel the weight of the situation, but at the same time, there was a stillness that made her think differently. Before, her goal was just to survive the next day. The exhausting work routine and the constant pressure of a life that gave her no space to breathe. Now, here in the dark, the only thing that mattered was how they would get out of this situation. She felt movement beside her, and when she looked, she saw Andrew staring at her. His eyes were tired, but there was something deeper there, something she hadn't quite identified until now. He seemed ... different. He was no longer the distant, authoritative man from the corporate world. He was as vulnerable as she was. Andrew began, but stopped, as if the words wouldn't come. He sat up, his legs bent in front of him, and ran his hands through his hair, trying to clear his thoughts. "What's wrong?" Harper asked softly, breaking the silence in the cave. She wasn't trying to hide behind her usual shield of strength and sarcasm anymore. Here they both had nothing to hide. He looked at her, hesitated for a moment, and then allowed himself to speak. "I'm not good with ... people. I've always been good at controlling situations, keeping everything in check. But here, He gestured around as if the storm, the cave, and the surrounding forest were swallowing them whole. "I have no idea how to react." Harper sighed, understanding more than she'd like to admit. She had her own internal barriers, her own insecurities, but here, with the rain as their only company, everything seemed clearer. They were the same. Different, but the same. "It's okay," she replied, finally letting out a light laugh. "We're not in a corporate battlefield, Andrew. We're just trying to survive. And this I get. Maybe sometimes it's not about controlling everything." He looked at her closely, as if seeing her in a new light. For the first time, she realized he was really listening, not just waiting for his turn to speak. Something had shifted between them. The tension that once seemed almost palpable was starting to fade. "This is hard, isn't it?" Harper said, breaking the silence that followed. "I never imagined I'd be going through something like this. And ... honestly, I don't know what to do." Andrew nodded, his eyes falling on his hands as if he were trying to find something to say. "I don't have all the answers, but I think we can do this together," he said with a sincerity that surprised her. "I know that when all of this is over, things will go back to normal. But for now, you're with me." She looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a wave of trust. Not because he was the businessman she thought he was, but because he was willing to be vulnerable, to be human beside her. "You're not alone, Andrew," she replied, and for some reason, those words felt more true than anything she had said before. They were in this together, as improbable as it seemed. The rain outside continued, but something was changing inside between them. Something subtle, yet real. A kind of mutual understanding. They had been forced to see each other in a way neither of them had imagined before. On one side, Andrew was breaking down, no longer the impersonal executive he had always been. And on the other side, Harper, so used to fighting alone, was beginning to realize she didn't have to anymore. Her strength was in her vulnerability. And somehow, he was starting to understand that. The time in the cave seemed suspended, with the sound of the storm echoing outside. But inside, they were learning to trust. It's not in words, but in the simple fact that they were here together. "We'll need to find a way out of here," Harper said, breaking the silence, her eyes fixed on the cave entrance. "But for now, let's rest. Tomorrow, the day will be harder." Andrew agreed with a nod, and the two settled as comfortably as they could, though the space was tight. The storm raged outside, but inside the cave, there was an uncommon stillness. The world outside could keep crumbling. But here, between them, there was a growing connection, something they couldn't ignore anymore. The dawn came with an unsettling calm. The rain had finally stopped, but the sound of the wind still blew strongly through the trees. Andrew and Harper were exhausted, but in a different way, as if the fatigue had united them in a shared experience. The ground was still unstable, the marks of the tremors visible on the surrounding vegetation. The forest seemed quiet, but there was something oppressive in the silence. Fear had given way to a deeper feeling. They were far from civilization, unsure of what lay ahead. But now, more than ever, they needed to move forward. "Are you okay?" Andrew asked, breaking the silence, his voice hoarse from lack of water and little sleep. Harper, sitting on a rock, looked at him, her eyes slightly swollen from the exhaustion, but with a calm smile on her face. "It's nothing I can't handle," she replied, with a slight tone of sarcasm, trying to mask the fatigue. Andrew smiled, but he knew the situation wasn't that simple. The protective instinct he was starting to feel for her, mixed with his gratitude for being alive, made him question how they had become so dependent on each other in such a short time. They barely knew each other, but the experience they were living forced them to trust each other completely. He stood up and approached her, offering his hand to help her up. "Let's try to find a safer shelter," he said. "We don't know how long it will take for the rescue teams to find us." Harper took his hand confidently, no longer hesitating. They were in this together, and somehow, that connection seemed stronger than anything she had ever felt. "I know it's hard, but if we keep standing still, we won't survive long on our own," Andrew said, his voice deeper now, free from the businessman facade he usually wore. He was just there, without armor. Harper looked at him for a moment, as if measuring the sincerity in his words. She, who had always kept her distance from everyone, now seemed more open, maybe even a bit more vulnerable. "Then let's go," she said. "I'm not waiting around for a miracle." They began their journey through the forest. The sound of leaves cracking beneath their feet, and the sound of small animals running through the trees around them. The fear of the dense forest was gradually replaced by a sense of action. They were moving, they were trying to find a way, and that was all they could do at that moment. Andrew proved to be more agile, trying to use his survival skills acquired through travels and adventures. He had basic knowledge, but nothing that would completely prepare him for a situation like this. However, his determination was unwavering. Harper, on the other hand, never hesitated. She moved with ease, as if she had been doing this her whole life, her resistance to natural hardships shining through with every step. The way she adapted to the environment, even with the exhaustion, was impressive. It was almost as if she was becoming stronger with each passing moment. They walked for hours, crossing streams, climbing small rises, trying to find a sign that they were heading in the right direction. As the sky began to darken again, the panic of being caught by the darkness started weighing on them. "We should look for a place to spend the night," Andrew said, trying to stay calm as he assessed the terrain. Harper nodded without hesitation. "We don't have much choice. But we need to make sure that the fire, if we make one, doesn't attract attention. We don't know where the rescue teams are, or if there are other people around. Andrew knelt and began searching for dry branches. Harper, sensing the tension in his body, joined him, breaking branches and helping gather material for the fire. The sound of their movements in the forest became a form of solace, as if the world around them had paused, letting them continue. "You know how to make fire?" Harper asked, her playful tone trying to mask her unease. She wasn't used to depending on others for these things. "I've started a few in camps," Andrew replied, with a light smile. "But I hope my experience is enough to not burn down the whole forest." Harper smiled, and the act of mutual care they shared brought a sense of ease to the situation. It was as if, for a moment, they were freeing themselves from the tension that had surrounded them in the last few days. As Andrew began to build the fire, Harper moved away for a moment, looking out at the horizon. She felt a strange sense of longing for the life she once knew, for the chaos, the daily pressures, but at the same time there was something about this moment that made her feel at peace. Here, right now, she was just Harper, and he was just Andrew. They were in the middle of a forest, with an uncertain future and a small fire between them. But there was something she couldn't deny. The connection was growing. When the fire finally caught, they sat in silence, both watching the flames dance. The heat from the fire was comforting, but the most comforting thing for Harper was Andrew's presence by her side. She didn't know what the future would bring, but in this moment, she knew that perhaps being with him was the only thing that felt right. They had found something there between the flames and the warmth of survival, something stronger than anything she could have imagined before. The night settled over the forest, silent and full of mystery. The fire crackled softly between the stones, casting dancing shadows on the surrounding trees. The warmth was comforting, but both knew they couldn't rest completely. The need to find a way out still hung over them, but something had changed. Something deeper was starting to grow between Andrew and Harper. It was no longer just about survival. It was something neither could deny anymore. "I never imagined I'd end up here," Harper said, her voice quiet, a little more vulnerable than usual. She watched the fire with focus, as if the flames could answer unasked questions. Andrew watched her, his eyes softening. "Me neither. But I don't regret it." He leaned forward slightly, the warmth of the fire making the atmosphere more intimate. "I want to thank you for everything you've done." Harper looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "I haven't done anything special, Andrew. I'm just trying to survive, just like you." But Andrew felt there was more to it than that. She had been his partner through every difficult moment since the disaster had struck. Without her, he would have been just another man lost in the forest, unable to handle the truth of his own situation. "You've been incredible," he said softly. "If I were alone, I'd have given up by now. But with you, I don't know. It feels like maybe we stand a chance." Harper looked at him, her expression unreadable. She hadn't been the type to talk about feelings, always using sarcasm as a shield. But there was something about Andrew that made her question her own defenses. "You're doing fine," she replied, trying to keep the tone light. "We just need to stay alive until someone finds us." The tension in the air between them was palpable. Silence, more than words, was speaking. Andrew felt the urge to step closer to her, but he held back. She was right there, next to him. But he knew that what he was feeling for her couldn't be forced. He couldn't just admit it not yet, not while they were still trapped. "Yeah, I know," he replied. "But sometimes surviving just isn't enough. I think we need more." Harper looked at him, her eyes reflecting the glow of the fire. "More what?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity, but also caution. Andrew sighed, trying to find the right words. He didn't want to rush anything, but he didn't want to lose the opportunity either. They were together at a pivotal moment, and the truth was that he was beginning to see her as more than just a partner in survival. She was more than that. Maybe. I'm my for word for I saw, I sent, I from, I sent, I saw, I saw, I just a way I was to die, so, I don't know. Maybe a little bit of company. I can't lie. This place is making me more reflective, he said, with a weak smile. Harper didn't answer immediately. She stayed quiet, staring at the fire as if she were processing what he'd said. Andrew could feel her gaze on him, but he didn't dare look back. There was something fragile about that moment, as if any wrong move would shatter the tension that had formed between them. I'm not good at this kind of thing, Harper finally said, breaking the silence. But you're not a normal kind of guy, Andrew chuckled, unsure of what she meant. I'm more normal than you think, he replied, trying to lighten the mood. But when he looked at her, his smile faded. She wasn't joking. Her expression had changed. She wasn't just being playful anymore. Don't know what's happening between us, Andrew, Harper said, her voice quieter. But I don't want it to distract us from what really matters right now. We need to survive. Andrew nodded slowly, understanding her words. But at the same time, something in his chest said that, even here, in the middle of the fight for survival, there was room for something more. Something he wasn't willing to ignore. I get it, he said, feeling the weight of his words. But I can't promise I'm going to ignore how I feel. Maybe it's crazy, but the truth is, even here, in the middle of all this, I feel like I'm connecting with you in a way I never imagined. Harper didn't respond. Instead, she moved a little closer, but stopped, as if hesitant. She looked at the fire for a moment before speaking again. I know what you mean, she murmured. But it's not that simple, Andrew. We can't let what we're feeling right now make us lose focus. Survival comes first. That's what matters. Andrew looked at her understanding. But at the same time, there was something in his chest, something that told him that even in the middle of this mess, there was space for more. Something between them that couldn't be ignored. He moved a little closer, his gaze fixed on hers. I'm not saying we should get lost in this, Harper, he said softly. It's just that, maybe, in the middle of all this, we can find something that's worth it. Harper looked at him, her expression softening. She seemed like she wanted to say something, but before the words could leave her mouth, she simply shook her head, almost as if she were giving up on trying to explain. Let's survive first, she said finally. Then we'll see what happens. That was enough for Andrew. There was nothing more to say. They were in this together, and for now that was all that mattered. But in that moment when their eyes met, Andrew knew that no matter what happened next, there was something between them that couldn't be ignored. Whatever it was, he knew it had the potential to grow. And as much as they tried to avoid it, it wouldn't be easy to run from what was beginning to form. The forest around them was peaceful, but there was an undeniable energy between Andrew and Harper. They had shared an intimate moment, a kiss that seemed to seal something deeper between them. But as Harper's words still echoed in his mind, Andrew knew there was something crucial she didn't yet know. Something that, if left unaddressed, could destroy everything they had started to build. Andrew looked at Harper, who still wore a faint smile, her serene face reflecting a peace he didn't feel worthy of offering. He wanted more. He wanted her to see who he really was, not just the man who had been there, disguised, fighting alongside her for survival. But, more importantly, the man he had been before all of this. He took a deep breath, slightly tense. She noticed, her brows furrowing slightly as she saw him grow serious all of a sudden. Harper, he hesitated. Before everything else, I need to tell you something. She looked at him, her small smile quickly fading into curiosity. She could tell something important was about to happen. Andrew had never shown this much vulnerability before. I know we've been through a lot together, and maybe that's why I got carried away. But what's happened between us can't continue based on a lie. He paused, looking into her eyes as if searching for the right words. I'm not just some guy, Harper. I'm the owner of the restaurant where we work, Magnolia Bistro, ... I've been disguised the whole time, as a waiter, trying to understand what was happening there. Harper, who had been so caught up in everything they'd shared, froze. Her eyes widened, and a wave of confusion spread across her face. She shook her head, as though she couldn't believe what she was hearing. You... ... what? Her words were filled with disbelief. You... ... You were the owner the whole time." Andrew took a small step back, feeling the weight of his own revelation. The air between them felt heavier now, more suffocating. He hadn't wanted to do this, hadn't wanted to lose the chance of being with her, but he knew it had to be said. He needed her to know the truth without any more disguises. "Yeah, Harper, I went in because I saw that things weren't going well at the restaurant, and I couldn't figure out what was happening. So I decided to disguise myself and work as a waiter to see what the others were going through." He took a breath, trying to let the sincerity flow from his chest. "I needed to see with my own eyes, not through the filter of reports, what was going on with the staff." Harper stared at him, a mix of anger and pain clouding her expression. It was Auntie just the revelation that hurt it was the realization that he'd been hiding it from her all along. That she had been deceived, and what else? She said in a low voice but firmly. You watched us all, pretended to be one of us, and when everything finally fell apart, you. I should have told you sooner." "I know that," Andrew interrupted, guilt evident in his eyes. "But I didn't want to be seen as just another distant boss, someone who makes decisions without really understanding what the people who work for him are going through. I wanted to know what was happening, Harper. I wanted to see things from my own perspective, without the facade. And that's when I saw you. I saw your effort, your dedication, and the strength you had, despite everything." He moved a little closer, his eyes earnest, but his voice shaking. "I didn't want to lie to you. It wasn't my intention. But what happened between us? It was real. And I can't keep going without being honest with you." Harper looked at him, still in shock. The blow of the truth was painful. But at the same time, she knew there was more to it than just the revelation. The connection they had built couldn't be destroyed so easily. She sighed, trying to process everything. Then, without saying another word, she stepped away from him, sitting on a nearby rock. The silence between them was heavy, filled with everything they had been through. Andrew watched her, unsure of what to say. He had no control over the situation anymore. All he could do now was wait. Wait for Harper to find within herself the strength to understand his decision. To decide if this was something she could deal with. After what felt like an eternity, Harper looked back at him, her face still tense. But now there was something else in her expression. The anger had turned into something deeper, something that was still taking shape. She sighed, then spoke. "You don't know how much this affects me, Andrew," Harper said quietly, but firmly. I can't forgive you, just like that. You have to understand, honesty has always meant everything to me. I thought I could trust you, that we were sharing something real, but you lied to me." Andrew's heart sank when he heard those words. She was right, he knew. But he also knew he couldn't go back. "I know I disappointed you, Harper, but I'm here now, trying to be honest. I did it because I saw in you a chance for something greater, something more important than what I had in my world of luxury and control. I saw you, and I wanted to believe that I could build something real." She looked at him for another long moment, then slowly she stood up and walked toward him. Her look softened, but the pain was still there. But there was something in her expression that showed she was starting to understand. "You don't know how much this messes with me, Andrew," Harper said, more quietly now, but still with a bit of tension. I don't know what this is going to mean for us. But you've got a chance to prove that you are more than the owner of an empire. You have the chance to be someone who truly cares." Andrew breathed a sigh of relief, feeling the weight lifting slightly, but he knew this was only the beginning. "I'll show you, Harper," he replied firmly. "I'll show you that I am willing to do whatever it takes to make it right." Harper gave him a small, genuine smile, then walked closer, placing her hand on his. "Maybe, just maybe, you have what it takes to prove that." And with that, they stood there, in the forest, knowing that, even amidst the chaos and pain, something real was beginning to emerge,